Efficient cutting without a sharp edge. The improved safety of rounded phaco needles. Steve Dewey, Colorado Springs, Colorado. With co-authors Liliana Werner and Nick Mamelis from the John A. Moran Eye Center, Salt Lake City, Utah. Safety. Your patient's greatest concern when faced with cataract surgery or considering refractive lens exchange. Imagine a simple, innovative change to the design of the phacoemulsification needle that will allow contact or even aspiration of the delicate iris or capsule without damage. Imagine that this innovative design change can even allow the application of ultrasound power to the capsule without causing it to rupture. What exactly is this difference? How can this needle change everything, and yet to use it require no change at all? The Dewey Radius tip, a needle design I have created with no sharp edges. Manufactured by MST, the meticulous rounding makes it safer to the iris and the capsule, and yet it still very effectively cuts using cavitation. This design works on any needle configuration, with any surgical technique, and on any phacoemulsification unit. Iris safety. These cases show the best way to be prepared for a small pupil is, well, to be prepared for a small pupil. Here are two patients with pseudoexfoliation. One just happens to be on Flomax, and of course, that's the one that dilated well in the beginning. In the upper left-hand corner, we see an incidental iris grab early in a divide and conquer case, damaging the sphincter. In the lower right-hand corner, we see another incidental grab, but this time without iris damage. Once the sphincter is damaged, it seems to have a tendency to find the lumen of the phaco needle again. At the end of the case, the sharp-edged needle has damaged the iris permanently. Yet even with the application of ultrasound, the radius tip has left this tissue functionally and cosmetically intact. Cutting efficiency. Rounding the tip to improve the safety of the needle does not sacrifice its performance. Looking at the power utilization for 2+ nuclei on a scale of 4 and a horizontal chop technique, the EPT is similar between the two needle configurations. Removing the nucleus is just as efficient. Measuring the time from the needle's insertion to the needle's removal, we find that the numbers are very similar for the rounded and sharp-edged tips. Reviewing the EPT for the denser 3+ on a 4+ scale nuclei and a horizontal chop, we see that the rounded and sharp tips are very similar in their ultrasound use, with a considerable improvement in performance with an improvement in technology. Needle time again shows that rounding a needle's edges does not decrease its efficiency in removing even a dense cataract. With more than 18 months of clinical experience, it was time to take the testing of the Dewey Radius tip to the next level. At the University of Utah's Moran Eye Center, we tested the tip with all 3 major phacoemulsification platforms. Our goal was to see exactly how a rounded tip can interact with the posterior capsule in as realistic a cadaverized simulation as possible. We used a 20-gauge straight needle with a 30-degree bevel for all testing. The first level of testing was fairly straightforward. We simply occluded the lumen of the needle with the posterior capsule and drove the vacuum first to 200 millimeters, then 400 millimeters mercury vacuum. All eyes that were available for this level of testing passed without any evidence of damage to either the capsule or the zonules. We were able to conclude that without a sharp edge, the capsule can withstand high levels of vacuum. But the big question remained: can the capsule withstand ultrasound? In answering this question, we were delighted with the very first specimen. We had to remove the cornea and prolapse the posterior capsule slightly forward, but we were able here to polish the capsule at 80% power and 20 millimeters mercury vacuum. When trying to go to the 90% power level, we found we ran into a small difficulty. The posterior capsule finally ruptured. Not entirely surprising, given that we were touching it with an active ultrasound needle. What was more interesting was that in review, this capsule had already been through 38 seconds of phaco time. Rather astonishing considering the long-held tenet that ultrasound alone would rupture the posterior capsule. With the 7th eye, we ran into the same problem we would expect if we had used a sharp needle. While stroking the capsule with the side of the needle, the capsule ruptured at only 15% power. The culprit? A simple burr created by the mishandling of this phaco tip. The bird phaco needle aside, the results obtained on 11 of the 12 study eyes were nothing short of incredible. With each test, we grew more amazed as to how much ultrasound energy the posterior capsule could tolerate prior to rupturing. This was a pilot study, and in this example we see the fourth eye we had the opportunity to work with. We were not paying complete attention to the delivery of energy through each individual phaco needle, and by the time this capsule broke while polishing at 40% power, we had already delivered 2 minutes and 17 seconds of ultrasound time with this phaco tip. The rupture created was round, with a flap, and was easily converted to a circular capsulotomy. Here, on our eighth eye, we are polishing the posterior capsule at 60% power with 20 millimeters mercury vacuum. Without resetting this machine between test eyes, the EPT delivered to this capsule is actually approaching 16 seconds. I hold the tip of the needle stationary against the posterior capsule, applying 10% power. This capsule withstood this for 7 seconds prior to rupturing. Again, as we had seen before, the capsular opening was round with a flap, and by grasping the flap and tearing in a circular fashion, I was able to complete the posterior capsulorhexis. The two openings are nearly concentrically overlapping, and this capsule was easily capable of supporting a posterior chamber lens implant. This was the 12th and final eye for the day, and by this time it was very easy to conclude that in the absence of a sharp edge or burr, the capsule can indeed withstand considerable amounts of ultrasound. The zonules in all of these examples have remained very stable, and this was a finding that was consistent across all of the eyes and all of the phaco platforms. Resetting the phaco time before this case, we observed that this capsule performed particularly well, absorbing 37 seconds of estimated phaco time before it finally ruptured at 40% power and 100 millimeters mercury vacuum. With my experience using the Dewey Radius tip from MST, I no longer see a need or use for a sharp needle during cataract surgery. For me, there is nothing more gut-wrenching than nearing the completion of a successful procedure only to rupture the posterior capsule and threaten the results for the patient. With the radius tip design, we have been able to explore several new avenues. First, a sharp edge is not necessary to remove a cataract. Second, vacuum alone will not break the capsule. Third, and most surprising, is that with a rounded phaco needle, the capsule can withstand significant amount of ultrasound without breaking. The clinical correlation of which is seen here, as I directly polish the remnants of a posterior subcapsular plaque with low levels of vacuum and ultrasound. With the greater margin of safety that this design has to offer, will the Dewey Radius tip prove to be the solution? I'm not entirely certain, but for now, it goes a long way towards addressing the problem.